everyone. Thanks for joining the presentation on exposure management and evolving from visibility to actionability. My name is David Suhu. I'm the VP of Product at Censys, and I'm excited to be here with everyone today. What we'd like to do, or what I'd like to do, is just kind of go over what we're hearing from a vendor perspective, as well as what we're hearing from our customers, our prospects, from some analysts. Go over kind of the problem that I think is out there in the market today, and then getting into an ideal solution. What would that look like? How could that actually start to make an impact to my business or our business? And then how do we actually start to make that shift from visibility to actionability and evolve to actually reduce risk across the organization? So when we take a step back, what we're really starting to see and what we have been seeing is this continuously evolving landscape, right? When we've done our own research looking at the internet map at Censys, we see that about 15% of services on the internet appear within the last day. That means that there's an incredible amount of new infrastructure being spun up on the internet day over day. When we look at that and we combine it with what we've seen on the attack surface perspective, we're actually seeing both growth in the internet and its usage, as well as on attack surface growth for our customers, our prospects, and all organizations across the internet, which is good, right? Because that means that companies are growing, that there are new products and services coming online. So we're seeing about 133% year over year growth there. And then something that's a little bit more concerning is this idea that ransomware cases, about 50% or a little bit less than 50% of ransomware cases began with software vulnerabilities on the attack surface. And maybe they didn't seem so bad to start with, but what they did do is they were jumping off points for lateral movement to other sensitive systems. And I think some of the challenges that we're starting to see in the market, as referenced by the SANS white paper here, is there's just too many results. We've had the same problem for such a long time, right? Alert fatigue. But I think that really comes down to how do we actually take the information that we have, make it actionable, and combine that with visibility to actually reduce risk for the organization, if you will. And some of these results are difficult to interpret, right? That means that we're lacking context, we're lacking the data necessary to actually action these things, which is becoming a problem. Overall, I think what we're starting to see is that everyone's claiming to have a solution for this problem, right? And I think mostly it resonates as attack surface management. Today, we didn't even get to X in our list of analysis here, but there's a ton of different attack surface management players and vendors out there in the space. And if you kind of look across them, what you start to recognize is this buzzword bonanza, right? Where everyone's just saying they do attack surface management. Some say they do discovery. They say that it's internal discovery, external discovery. They do dark web scanning, lots of different things, right? And it's really confusing kind of where we need to go as internet citizens or as someone protecting the organization from external threats, right? And so, again, taking a step back, I think the question really is, what is the problem that we actually need to solve, right? And if I were to kind of think about that, it's missing visibility into the assets that attackers will exploit, right? Through cloud transformation, digital transformations, shadow IT, remote workforce, there are even more avenues to attack surface proliferation than we had in the past. And part of that problem is also the dynamic nature of these new cloud assets or these new cloud services that are spinning up to support business efficiency and growth. They're short-lived, right? They're dynamic, they're ephemeral. We need to figure out a way how to get visibility into those, as well as those traditional on-prem assets that are supporting a large part of the business as well. And ultimately what happens is we get access to those assets and then we scan them and we start to see the metadata associated with them, right? And we start to fingerprint the vulnerabilities, the software, the vulnerabilities, the misconfigurations. But often we're missing the context necessary to take quick action, right? We don't know who owns the asset. There's not enough threat context to facilitate prioritization. Sometimes we get the result of a finding, but we don't actually understand how that finding was created. And there's compensating controls that can help us mitigate the presence of a mere misconfiguration, vulnerability, or exposure that aren't factored into just a simple detection, right? You could have a web application firewall rule that actually adds, strengthens the security control, even though you need to have that asset with that software and that vulnerability open and exposed to the internet. And then on top of that, right, it's all about making a business impact. But when we think about security, that's been incredibly hard to have a measurable business impact because one, what we're doing is we're actually measuring the absence of an exposure or an exploit or a data breach. But some of the trends that we're starting to see out there in the market is that these old SLAs of critical must be remediated in less than 14 days and high in less than 30 days, they're becoming antiquated. We need something different. We need something a little bit more continuous, a little bit more encompassing of residual risk to the business. Something like an average length of exposure, being able to track that over time, your security performance or your attack surface or your exposure, however you want to think about that. We really need to look at what we were, last quarter versus this quarter. Did the changes that we made to our security controls make a difference, right? And one way to do that is looking at our own, but also measuring that against industries, right? Whether it's the same company and this or the same type of company and the same industry, same geolocation. We need to be able to benchmark our performance because we know that at the end of the day, we're going to have security issues. It's just a matter of prioritizing the right ones. And how does that compare to other industries? How does that compare to my own impact that my security team is making, right? And kind of that chart on the right really starts to exemplify all of the crazy questions that we need to answer as we start to identify, a celebrity vulnerability or a critical vulnerability, right? We need to figure out if that asset is ours. Can we trust the detection? Is this actually something that we need to fix, right? Then we start to ask the question, like, is it fixed yet? Once we put it out there to the IT team, the security ops team, and it actually gets remediated, we need to find some way to test if it's actually remediated. And then we need to start asking the question if that really made an impact. Again, there are existing solutions out there in the market today beyond attack surface management, right? And I think the problem, again, is not to replace every single solution, but it's really how do we take our existing tech stack and make it even stronger? Like what are the missing gaps? And so some of those challenges that we've started to see and our customers and prospects have started to see is, the solutions that they have only scan what they're pointed at, right? And it's hard to keep pace with that dynamic cloud infrastructure, as we was talking about before. These open source tools that I think, have the allure of being cost effective, cheap, and usable, they don't scale with the size of the organization, right? It also costs an entire engineer or two, plus infrastructure, plus maintenance to spin those things up. And prioritization is all over the place right now, right? We have many detections coming from many different places. It's disparate and fractured. It's not normalized. We need to find a way to kind of unify a single framework for an organization that's purpose-built and aligns to their security objectives that allows us to prioritize effectively. We also need to be able to answer the question quickly as to who owns this asset and who's accountable for it to facilitate faster remediation. And then we also need to pull in our partners across the organization, right? Collaboration is necessary to strengthen business resiliency, and we need something that is going to help us do that. And so when we look at this, right, I think what we're really looking for is a solution that proactively secures the organization by discovering these unmanaged assets and allows us to take quick action on the exposures that will meaningfully reduce the risk of a data breach, right? We need to protect the organization and reduce risk. And one of the big challenges that we have there is identifying the entire attack surface and then identifying the assets on the attack surface that are unmanaged and are going without any oversight, right? And in order to do that, there's kind of three main areas that I think we need to go try to tackle. as a market, right, or as an industry, which is how do we get real-time visibility into those cloud assets? How do we get real-time visibility into what attackers see? That means having comprehensive, up-to-date, and accurate visibility of externally visible assets, right? What is externally exposed is an incredibly important question to ask. These are the first things to get scanned by attackers, the first things to get um, exploited, if you will. We also need actionable risk-based prioritization, right? We need these risks to be contextualized with evidence. We need asset intelligence to help us understand who owns or who is accountable for those assets. And we need exploit intelligence to help facilitate a level of threat, right? What out there on my attack surface is going to be exploited or looks valuable to an attacker. And then we also need some automation, right? We talked about collaboration with different departments or adjacent departments to help us strengthen our business resiliency. When we say automation here, we really think about seamlessly embracing and extending the ecosystem with everything that we're finding on the attack surface, providing that right context to create those actionable insights and really reduce that risk. And then we wrap all of that up with some nice reporting. And ideally, what happens is, we're starting to facilitate not just a new input into the security process, but we're actually powering it with good data so that we can get good results on the other side too. So when we think about real-time visibility, the problem is actually more than just scanning faster, right? Yes, we could scan faster, but what we really need to do is we need to scan faster. We need to attribute those assets faster. And we need to make sure that you still own them, right? Because those cloud assets are changing hands all the time. And then once we figure out that these assets are still mine in that sense, then we actually need to scan them for risks, right? We need to make sure that risk is still detected. And the order of operations of these three different tasks actually matters a lot, right? If you do one but not the other, oftentimes what you'll end up with is, kind of not dead data, but no change in data. Nothing actually updates, right? Because if you don't increase your scan frequency, but you increase your risk detection frequency, then you're always scanning that same old data, or you're trying to detect those risks over the same old data, and you don't actually see any changes, right? If you're not adding in that layer of attribution in the middle, you could be generating more false positives because you're actually scanning an asset at a time that it was used by a different organization, right? So you really need these three. And when we think about that coverage of the attack surface, I think we need to get all of those three freshest data, best attribution, and most actionable risks over all the host, certificate, domains, and web entities, right? Like these are the different assets that make up your externally visible attack surface. And they go a little bit deeper, but you can start to ask great questions about a host, right? And the certificates it uses. Are there, old or deprecated TLS versions that a host has on a certificate, right? And I think that matters a lot because it's all about the host. It's not actually about the certificate. If it's unused, but it's in your name, does it matter? And then starting to ask the question, is that host important to the business? Does it have sensitive information on it? Same thing with web applications. We know that the world is moving more towards this SaaS business model. Web applications are the primary interface by which our consumers are interacting with our products and services. We need to secure those as well. And then when we kind of like think about those exposures that are on the attack surface, here's maybe a broad swath of where we start to think about, okay, what are the things that I need to actually secure? On one side of the fence, we have unmanaged assets. We have service misconfigurations, information leakage, exposed devices and services, misconfigurations, software vulnerabilities, all of these different kind of basic security hygiene things. I think, if we fixed all of our basic security hygiene, that would account for, I think, maybe 98% of all exploits. In a study that I read, I can't remember exactly where, but that's not happening, right? We still need to figure out a way to prioritize the most important ones, and we need to get visibility of them to start. Then we can go a step deeper, right? We can start to do deeper active risk detection by interacting with each of the assets and interrogating them on a more kind of intimate basis, right? We can start with credential stuffing. We can try MySQL injections, cross-site scripting. We can also look at dangling DNS to identify subdomain takeovers, right? These are all different types of exposures on the attack surface that we need to protect against. And then, again, just going back to the crowded attack surface management marketplace, there is, some adjacent and noisy detections that are actually detracting away from our ability to have actionable findings, right? Dark web entrance, typo squatting, impersonation, those are probably on the longer tail of what we need to accomplish, more so than kind of the bulk or the core best practice that we need to put in place today. And so if you take kind of the exposure side, right, and you have that as a starting place, and we start to think about how do we make that an actionable risk-based prioritization framework, we can start to take those exposures, those basic security hygiene, deep interrogation with great detection evidence. We can layer in asset importance as defined by what an attacker would see, right? Is it a login page? If I'm an attacker, I can actually look at an asset, I can see that there's a login page on it, and I can make an assumption that this is something that I would want to exploit, right? Because login page means, password, credentials, sensitive information on the other side. I can start to make a distinction about production servers versus development servers. I can see critical dependencies between assets. I can start to look at how easy something is to discover, and then I can also do I can try to do some attack path mapping to find choke points where there's a single asset that has connections out to more critical assets for that lateral movement that we were talking about before. So building all of that into some asset importance metric and then thinking about exploit likelihood. Today where we are is thinking very reactively. We're looking at different data feeds, proof of concept code, exploits in the wild. These are all different types of reactive measures looking at things that have already happened, right? So I think that's step number one. If we don't have that in place, we need to get there so that we can prioritize what we know is actively exploited in the wild or what we think could be actively exploited in the wild. And then as we think about, going proactive, right, we need to look at, internet prevalence, right? How prevalent is a vulnerability out there in the entire internet? Can we use that as a measure of, attractiveness from an attacker perspective? There's new metrics coming into place like EPSS that really does have a predictive notion to it. And then the other of which is we also need to try to test for those compensating control so we can really get a measure of residual risk after we've done all the things to kind of mitigate that, right? And that can go back into that prioritization model to say, hey, this misconfiguration, this vulnerability has a compensating control. We should decrease its severity or its risk to the business here. So we take all those and we build an actionable risk prioritization framework. And once we get there, so we've got real-time visibility. Now we have these actionable risks. We really need to figure out how to build an integrated ecosystem and embrace and extend that ecosystem, right? So we can actually improve visibility by building in more inputs into how we discover the attack surface. We know that we have some of these tools in place today, and getting these integrated into our process is going to be impactful, right? It's going to improve our visibility. So thinking about things like cloud security posture management tool, right? That's integrated with your cloud service providers. We can go direct into those cloud service providers, integrating with domain and IP registrars, all the places where assets are proliferating, right? And so all of those are coming in. They're helping us get great visibility, helping us detect the right assets, those unmanaged assets, as well as those risks on the attack surface. And then we want to facilitate remediation, facilitate actionability through the ecosystem into those existing security tools that we have in place today. And I think there's many different ideas and solutions that we can start to build and really empower once we get to that integrated ecosystem as well. But we'll get to that as kind of a next step. And so when we think about how we're actually shifting from just having visibility to actionable risk prioritization, that starts with embracing, or it ends with embracing and extending that ecosystem. But, it really starts to think about evolving from that attack surface management solution that's just providing that visibility, right? That discovery, that inventory management, and shifting over to an exposure management solution that allows you to understand asset importance, right? Allows you to start to measure residual risk and build in those automation and integrations that actually reduce that risk, right? And then ultimately, bringing that back up into different board level metrics that can really help to facilitate the story as well. So where can we go from here? Once we've shifted, what does that actually allow us to do? Once we have a great attack surface management tool in place, we can start to enhance red team, vulnerability management, pen testing. The first thing is trying to do reconnaissance on the attack surface. Why make that a manual process? Just facilitate it with good attack surface management practices. And we can start to improve threat hunting and correlation in the SIM. Once we know the assets, we get that visibility, we can take it into the SIM, we can start to detect that anomalous behavior, which assets with a vulnerability are reaching out to XYZ infrastructure, right? Can we go do an enrichment on that other infrastructure to identify any indicators of compromise? And looking at that, right, we can start to map adversary TTPs to those exposures, right? If we know that we're in an industry with a ransomware group that targets a specific CVE, and that CVE, what it does is it gives them access to that asset. They live off the land. Sometimes they spin up, just for simplicity, an RDP port or RDP service. Can we see a CVE with an RDP service exposed on an asset and use that as an indicator of compromise, start to take action on that? And then, getting all of that data in, capturing it from a historic perspective, being able to measure it will allow us to do better anomaly detection, look at infrastructure behavior, kind of track towards a baseline and see how things are changing from the baseline. If most of my assets don't have a particular port open, or sometimes there's a service that's on a standard port and we see that it's on a non-standard port, can we use that information and really start to generate these unique analytic and insights from the data and help us detect even more risk? So there's lots of places that we can go. And it starts with visibility, but it doesn't stop there. We need to shift from visibility to get to that actionability through risk-based prioritization, understanding asset intelligence, exploit intelligence, and layering it all in and integrating that with our existing ecosystem. Thanks for joining me for the great presentation and session. Again, my name is David Suhu. I'm the VP of Product at Censys, and look forward to speaking with everyone soon.